Okay, let's try and picture this. You're stepping onto these reed mats. It's ancient Babylon, maybe around 1800 BC.
Yeah, and you can almost smell it, can't you? That sort of metallic tang of incense, maybe myrrh burning.
Mm.
But underneath, there's this tension.
Exactly, a kind of dread. And then the high priest, Enmakar, he speaks. The temple sends its people.
And that's the moment. A young boy, maybe 12 summers old, is singled out, claimed.
And he's claimed. Why? Not for anything he did wrong.
No, quite the opposite. It's because of what he is, or rather, what he isn't yet. He's chosen specifically for his untouched state, his purity.
Seen as necessary by the priests, right, for Marduk and Ishtar's service.
Precisely. That purity was apparently essential for, divine service.
Okay, so let's really get into this. This deep dive is taking us straight into these, well, dusty but incredibly detailed records from the old Babylonian period.
Clay tablets, ritual scripts.
Yeah, even medical texts from Hammurabi's time were focusing on the male temple servants, the Asinu and Kargaru, trying to understand their roles, the rituals, this whole system.
And it's crucial to get the power dynamic right from the start. We think of Hammurabi and his code, right? Around 1792 BC, setting out laws.
Establishing order, yeah.
But even a king like Hammurabi, there were limits. The temple priesthood had this ancient, almost absolute authority in certain spheres.
They controlled the oracles, the connection to the gods.
Exactly. And their right to demand resources, including people, was basically enshrined, protected by law. The king might run the city, but the temple, well, it ran the divine connection.
That separation, or maybe that hierarchy, God's will trumping even the king's law sometimes, that feels key to understanding this whole situation.
It is. And it explains the family's powerlessness. We see hints in the records, the boy's mother trying to petition, probably etching a plea onto a small clay tablet.
But it doesn't work. The response is quick, final. How did the temple justify just taking a child like that?
Well, the sources are quite bureaucratic about it, almost chillingly so. The justification came from divination.
Reading sheep livers, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. If the omens, the patterns on the liver, were interpreted as Ishtar needing a new servant for her cult, well, that was it. Unavoidable.
And the rationale given?
It was about purity. The boy being untouched meant he was ripe for the goddess's embrace, as the priest put it.
Yeah.
Any kind of worldly experience, was seen as a taint. It would ruin the vessel needed for this high service.
So the demand is made, it's official. What happens next? The physical journey into the temple.
Right. The sources describe entering the temple enclosure, the Adamananki. You'd go past guards, maybe with those copper-tipped spears. The air thickens with incense, myrrh.
And once inside, how does the temple start to break down his resistance, prepare him?
It starts with isolation and purification. Methods really designed to strip away his old identity, his connection to the outside world.
Where would they take him?
Deep inside the temple walls. The special chambers, sometimes painted, we think, with frescoes, lions, bulls, potent symbols of Ishtar's dual nature, love and war.
And the purification itself.
Stripping off his simple clothes, his tunic, anointing the body with oils, probably sesame oil, scented, and all the while, priests murmuring incantations to Ishtar, the morning and evening star, Venus.
Then the isolation kicks in. That sounds deliberate, almost like a psychological tool.
Oh, absolutely. The records mention days alone. Just a straw mat, maybe some water flavored with tamarisk leaves. Very basic.
And the purpose, just cleansing.
More than that, it was meant to purify the blood, as they saw it, but also to weaken resistance. Sensory deprivation, really, making him more receptive, more compliant to the idea of this divine calling.
And this leads up to a key moment.
Yes. Usually on the third night, the high priest himself, maybe someone like Enmakar, would visit. And he wasn't there to discuss options. He was there to state the terms, something like, the goddess requires vessels empty of mortal paint.
A final declaration. No negotiation.
None.
What if, despite everything, the boy refused? Or tried to run? What were the real consequences beyond just his own fate?
And that's where Hammurabi's laws come crashing back in. Refusal wasn't just about the boy facing death. It meant absolute catastrophe for his entire family.
How so?
The laws were very strict about protecting temple property and temple rights. If the family defied the temple's claim, their land could be seized. Their social standing, everything they had, could be just wiped out.
So the pressure wasn't just on the boy. It was immense pressure on the whole family unit.
Immense. The choice was effectively removed. It was total surrender demanded by the state-backed religion.
Okay, this is where the records get incredibly difficult, but also crucial for understanding what this service actually entailed. It wasn't just spiritual dedication, was it? There's a physical transformation involved.
That's right. The medical texts, and even hints and myths like the descent of Inanna, they confirm the method. It was castration.
A severing. Why? What was the rationale behind that?
The idea seems to have been to preserve a state of eternal male virginity, to transform them into these eunuchs, dedicated solely to temple service for life.
The temple archives, do they describe this procedure?
They do, with a kind of clinical detail that's frankly harrowing to read. Descriptions of the tools, bronze knives sharpened carefully on whetstones, instructions for poultices, herbs to try and stop the bleeding.
And the scene itself?
Brutal. The boy would be bound, likely to a wooden altar. An altar the text sometimes note was dark with old blood from previous ceremonies. And the smell, you can only imagine vinegar used constantly to clean the blades.
There's one detail you mention about the surgeon, Shulie Hill, working with steady hands, but whispering apologies.
Yes, it's a tiny detail, almost lost, but it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests this internal conflict. He's doing his duty, performing the ritual correctly, ensuring the boy survives, technically.
But he knows.
But he seems to know, yes. That whisper, unheard by anyone else, suggests a recognition of the profound violation happening. Even within the system, maybe there were these moments of human dissonance. Duty versus cruelty.
Recovery must have been incredibly dangerous, long, difficult.
Weeks, often, in a dim temple infirmary. We read about practical things, managing fevers, using salves, maybe crushed garlic and honey, trying to fight off infection, which must have been rampant.
And the psychological side, we have records of that too.
Devastatingly so. Accounts of shared grief among the boys recovering. There's a mention of one named Belshunu, his voice already cracking from the change, just weeping for his home, his old life.
A fractured sense of self, you called it.
Yes. Deep confusion, trauma that likely stayed with them long after the physical wounds healed.
So assuming they survived a recovery, the transformation was then complete. They weren't just boys from Babylon anymore. They were something else.
They became the Asinu and Kargaru, couple servants.
Yeah.
Visibly marked by their role, often wearing distinctive clothing like flowing skirts of fine linen, maybe dyed with indigo.
And their duties. What did they do day to day?
Their roles were actually quite high status within the cultic sphere. The Kargaru, for instance, were performers, masters of ritual.
What kind of performance?
Elaborate dances, often very emotional, symbolically reenacting myths, Ishtar's battles, her sacred dramas, and many joined the gala choirs.
Ah, the gala choirs. Tell us about them. They seem important.
Very central. The galas were famous for singing these high-pitched laments, particularly for Tammuz, Ishtar's consort. His death and return cycle was key to Babylonian religion, representing fertility, the seasons.
And their altered physiology made their voices suitable for this.
Exactly. The castration meant their voices didn't fully break or retained a higher pitch, perfect for the mournful high tones needed for these sacred dirges. The ritual texts from the 18th century BC make it clear these performances were major public events, especially during big festivals like the Akitu.
So they were highly visible symbols.
Living symbols of the goddess's power and the demands of the cult, yes. Performers, but also embodiments of the ritual itself.
And we can actually track individuals through the administrative records, like finding a personnel file on a clay tablet.
Amazingly, yes. We have one tablet from Babylon, around 1750 BC Hammurabi's reign still. It documents a boy named Marduk, dedicated when he was 11.
And it shows his family got compensation.
Yes, barley and a cow, a kind of transactional record of their loss, if you will.
That's incredible detail.
And what's truly heartbreaking about that tablet is what comes next. It notes Marduk became a successful temple performer, noted, respected within that system.
Yeah.
But the scribe adds a notation, notations of restless spirit.
What does that mean?
It seems to have been official temple code, almost. Used to document deep, melancholy, ongoing psychological distress, spiritual instability. So even in success, the record acknowledges this profound, hidden cost. The wound never fully healed.
Wow. That phrase, restless spirit, just hangs there. And yet, some did rise beyond purely cultic roles, into positions of real influence.
Absolutely. Over time, especially as the temple administration grew more complex, eunuchs became trusted figures. Because they had no family lineage outside the temple, no heirs to worry about, they were seen as loyal.
Any example?
Much later, yes. Someone like Mushalim Marduk around 550 BC. He advised kings, interpreted oracles, influenced policy. Huge power.
But even then,
Even then, the sources sometimes mention a certain hesitation in council, a flicker of that inner conflict perhaps, suggesting that even centuries later, even in power, the scars of that initial dedication, that transformation, were still present.
and this whole practice, it wasn't just confined to Babylon City itself, was it? Hammurabi's empire was large.
It spread with the empire. It seems to have become part of imperial religious policy. We find records in Mari, way up northwest around 1760 BC. They talk about a caravan bringing 10 virgins, likely meaning untouched boys from Amorite tribes, specifically for temple service.
So it was imposed on conquered or tributary peoples too.
It seems so. And war captives as well. We have texts mentioning captives from Elam, taken around 1765 BC, facing the knife almost immediately upon arrival. It was a fate applied across the empire.
And it lasted long after Hammurabi's dynasty fell.
Incredibly durable. It continued right through the Kassite period after 1595 BC. There's one chilling account from around 1400 BC describing a mass dedication, 20 boys at once. The scribe notes their cries echoing like the howls of jackals across the marshes.
Just awful. It shows how embedded this became institutionally.
It really does. The need for this specific kind of purity achieved this way endured for well over 1,000 years.
Right up to the Neo-Babylonian era with Nebuchadnezzar II.
Yes, even Nebuchadnezzar, famous for rebuilding Babylon, his siege of Jerusalem in 597 BC. The records show young Judean males being selected. They appear on ration lists, noted for ritual suitability.
Facing the same fate as boys in Hammurabi's time centuries before.
Precisely the same fate. It demonstrates how this practice was part of asserting religious dominance, maintaining imperial control through sacred ritual, however brutal.
And across all these centuries, the evidence of the psychological damage remains consistent.
Very consistent. That fractured sense of self keeps appearing. The knowledge that their bodies were fundamentally altered made neither man nor woman, as some texts might imply.
Defiance turning into resignation.
Yes, often. A kind of quiet grief seems to settle in. We get glimpses, a stolen moment, someone weeping into their cloak, hidden away. The system successfully changed their bodies, their roles, their function in society. But it seems it never fully erased the person they were before or the memory of what was taken.
So, pulling it all together, looking back across all these sources, what's the big picture here?
Well, I think this deep dive shows a history where divine service was believed to demand this absolute, almost artificial purity. But achieving that purity came at an immense human cost.
Bodies remade, essentially, without consent.
Exactly. Violently remade. And individual fear, trauma, somehow transformed into required ritual performance for the community, for the gods.
The practice did eventually fade out, didn't it, by the Hellenistic period?
Yes, it largely disappears from the records then. But the emotional weight in those earlier accounts, it's still palpable. You know, the image of the cries of the boys mingling with the hymns sung by the established eunuch choirs.
Or, as you said, a survivor preparing the next terrified child for the same ritual.
Right. It just highlights this frightening reality. How institutional power, especially when tied to sacred belief, can weave profound harm, physical cruelty, right into the very fabric of tradition, make it seem normal, even necessary.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What really stands out to you when you consider that line between what's seen as religious duty and what looks to us now like institutional cruelty, especially through that ancient lens of spiritual belief?